Review Book One is all about the books that I've read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He's a debut author and the author of the book Influence. Fulfillment begins with who's shaped with you, the ends with who's better because of you, other than Mr. Phil Ransom.
Good, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Phil. And can you please introduce more about yourself that I miss?
Sure enough, I have been in working with people all of my life. Some of them influenced me for the better. And a few years ago, began to take note of those people, started writing an anthology of thank yous, and last fall decided I need to put this in a book. And the best use of all of those stories is to help people discover what I discovered along the way. And that is that fulfillment actually ends with who's better because of you. So to take all those things I learned from other people and in a similar fashion, invest it in others for their benefit and for their good. It's been a very rewarding journey.
Indeed, rewarding, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world, Mr. Phil. Thank you for building your legacy to the world. So, your book opens with a profound claim. Fulfillment begins with who shape you. Now, what you achieve, not what you build, but who shape you. When you
Yes.
look back across your own life, who is the first person who comes to mind? The one whose fingerprints are still visible on who you become.
That is why it's a whole book, because it's a binder full of people through the years. The first one would probably be my parents, of course, but I can't say that anyone had a first place influence in my life because there were so many. And when I recognize who they are, then it it has a way of becoming a reservoir that I draw from. I will say in the book, there's one person that started this whole process, and that was a high school music teacher who invested in me heavily, not just in music, but in philosophy of life, in uh, outlook when things don't go well. And he had a huge influence on me. So that was the one that started the anthology.
Very well said, Mr. Phil. You're asking readers to trace their own formation, then name the people who left their mark. For someone
Mhm.
who grew up in chaos or neglect, who maybe wishes they had not been shaped by certain people, what do you say about the wounds that shape them? Can wounds also be formative in a way that leads to fulfillment?
Yes, it can. In the book I describe four categories of influence. There's a direct influence where someone who coaches you, maybe teaches you, who walks a part of life with you. That's a direct influence, and those we really like. There's the indirect influencer. That would be authors or speakers that you hear but you never meet. Um, those are indirect influencers. The negative, the ones you just asked for, are people who may have hurt you. They may be adversaries, they may be bullies. Uh, they bring loss and they bring pain. And probably the most positive thing that can come from those is where a person remembers what happened to them or what that individual was like and says to themselves in the mirror, when I'm given the chance, I'm not doing it that way. They turn that into a determination of sorts. And then the fourth category is the compound influences where one person, two-person, three all say kind of the same thing and you end up getting it. For example, if a mom says be kind and your coach says be a good sport, the two connect and you get it. So that's the compound influence. But yes, negative influences definitely do help us if we respond correctly to them.
Interesting, Mr. Phil. You've written a book about influence, which means you've thought deeply about how people transfer something of themselves to others. When someone shaped you, a parent, a teacher, a mentor, what were actually doing on those moments? Was it the words? Was it the presence? Or was it something harder to name?
Actually, the three-fourths of the things that we remember about people we admire are not actions; they are attitudes. And that's in this first one that I noticed that started this process. His attitude toward life, toward music, toward students was something that I wanted to emulate later. I write early in the book about my grandfather and my father, and there are some specific memories I have, but what I remember the most and what inspires me the most is their attitude toward life, their outlook on it. And that's true. Studies have been done. 3 out of 4 of the positive things remembered are the attitudes that the person carries.
Totally agree with you, Mr. Phil. Attitude. I remember those people with their good attitude or with their
Mhm.
the bad attitude. You talk about influence as something that happens whether we intended it or not. For a person who doesn't feel particularly influential, who thinks I'm just giving my life, not shaping anyone, what are they missing about how influence actually works?
They are just getting started. What you just described is at the beginning of the process. A person who sets out to be influential has a very good chance of becoming self-centered because I want it's something that I want. If that's what I want is the influence. And what I teach people in the book is that it's very closely related to gratitude, but even that has to grow. Probably the first thing that readers are going to find is that there's a gratitude that wells up when we think about the people that we grew up with or that had an effect on our life and our well-being. The first thing we notice is probably a what I call a pay it back gratitude, but that's not healthy because that becomes an indebtedness, and we find ourselves saying, there's no way that I can pay that back. And that becomes a self-defeating sort of a thing. What we're hoping is to move up into the next level where it's a private gratitude, it's internal still, and it's for the time being self-focused. It's when we look in the mirror and we say, look how blessed I am. But we don't really know what to do with it. We just know we're blessed. We know that somebody has poured themselves into us or opened a door or something to that effect. The next step, and it's I call it serious work, but it's not heavy work, remembering those people, whereas it becomes external. And we think about where we are today and we say, look what I can give from what I've been given. And it becomes then a reservoir that you dip out of that's way bigger than life. Somebody's name comes up in a staff meeting, and you know about that person's aptitude, you know about their attitude, their skills, and you speak up even though they're not there. And you say, I think she's ready for that. I think we should talk to her about it and see if she's willing to step into that role. She may not know for a few months, she may not know for a couple of years that it was your voice that put her name in the center of the possibilities, and that is influence. It's after the fact, but you don't count on it coming back to you. You just know that somebody did that for you. It's my turn to do it for others. That's the best kind. It's external gratitude.
The best kind, indeed. You've likely observed people who receive wonderful shaping but never pass it on. They took it in, but it stopped with them.
Mhm.
What's the blockage? What keeps someone from becoming a conduit rather than just a reservoir?
Many times they don't know. They're so focused on getting the next promotion, the next raise, um, coming up through, I call them achievements. We're striving to achieve, and our Western culture is built largely on that. But it's when we stop for a minute and we think about the people behind us who've been pouring into us that we begin to let this gratitude come up. All of that to say, I think at first it's inadvertent. they've never slowed down enough to think about it. And we live in a culture that doesn't like for people to just sit and think. It might be on the big screen across the living room. It might be on the iPad sitting next to us on the couch. It might be in the phone in our pocket. Society doesn't want us to sit and think very much. They're programming, look, 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 look. If we can turn all of that off for a minute and remember, we're going to start to think of some people who had a big effect in our lives. Even though we know that there are people that have influenced us, sometimes the fear of not knowing how to treat that, what to do with it, has an effect as well. I liken it to a youngster who's learning to play basketball. There are many, many, many shots that don't go in before one finally does. But that's the first one. There's a second one that follows, two, three, four more. And after a while, the young person begins to say, I can get this ball through that hoop. And after they get a little bit better, they're always out in the driveway shooting hoops because they just love it. And gratitude, being thankful, giving other people opportunities kind of works that same way. Start slow, little successes, and you grow into just loving it, loving what happens when you share, when you give.
Yes, indeed. It's better to give than to receive, what they said.
Uh-huh.
Conversely, you've probably seen people who had very little good shaping but somehow learned to give what they never receive. How does that happen? Where does the capacity from come from when the well was dry?
I believe it comes from either within or it comes from someone close. Maybe one person, maybe two people that are honest enough to sit down with an individual who feels pretty much empty and said, look where you are now compared to where you could have been if a few people didn't step up. It may not be very many, it may not be very substantial, but it's there. It might be a mom who works two jobs to keep the kids rolling, to keep them in school, who does without a lot of things herself so that her kids can have a fighting chance. When a youngster gets old enough to look back at that and recognize what mom gave up, even though she might be just one individual, enough to spark that process of I'm going to be like that, and I'm even going to do better if I can, knowing what I now know. It does start small. It really does in every case.
Baby steps, people, baby steps. You've titled the book Influence with an exclamation.
Yes.
That suggests energy, urgency, or maybe even surprise. What about topic feel urgent to you right now? Why this book? Why this moment?
The reason for the exclamation point is that when we realize it, the dot at the end of the sentence is inadequate. When I stop and realize all that has been given to me, all of the people that have invested in my life, and I tell a lot of their stories in the 150-page book. They didn't have anything that they were trying to do at that moment, but the influence they had on my life, the effect that it had on how I look at life is more than just a dot at the end of the sentence. It's an exclamation point in my life. And so what I want to do, if I have just finished the book and I get the concepts in it, I want to make that kind of an exclamatory difference in the lives of the people that are in my world, particularly the people that are coming up behind me. Kids who need another chance. A neighbor kid who just, if I would spend 3 or 4 minutes with them instead of saying hi and going in the house, that can have a long-term effect, which multiplied over time, it compounds like interest does at the bank. Over time, it can be something that's really remarkable. I tell the story in the book about a fifth grader who was the son of a couple that I had in a choir, and they sat out in the audience part of the auditorium while the choir practiced. And one evening, I I wanted to play a demo recording for the choir before they started recording, or not recording, rehearsing. And so I asked him if he would come up to the sound booth, which is in the balcony, and if he would press play for me when it came time to play that demo. And he agreed. I knew that his mom and dad had a big stereo at home, so he wasn't going to abuse anything up there. And he did fine. When I went up after rehearsal to get the demo cassette, everything had been closed down, turned off. The sliders on the soundboard were all zeroed out, and the cassette was sitting there in its case all by itself. I thought, nicely done. A couple weeks later in church, I noticed that he was sitting up in the balcony watching the sound crew over their shoulders, very much interested in what was going on. So I had asked him if he would like to learn how to do that, and he said, "Yeah, I think I would." Connected him with one of the sound techs who liked kids, and he, over several months, became pretty good at what he does. Well, I moved away. He graduated from high school, went on to college, and we lost track of each other for over 20 years. And then a few years ago, I found him on LinkedIn, quite by accident. We reconnected and we talked for a little bit. And I said, "So, what are you doing these days?" He goes, "Well, I have a company that is mine. It's called Web Feet Productions. I have a 30-foot audio and visual truck that we go to conferences and conventions in the state of Texas. We do the sound, we do the lighting, do the video promotions, and we have our claim to fame is nobody leaves for home, or we don't mail the copies to you at home. You pick up your copy before you leave for home and you've got it." I said, "That is amazing, Shane." He goes, "Here, Phil, you got to hear this. People ask me all the time how I get started. And I say to them, my mom and dad's choir director asked me to press play one night before rehearsal, and it kind of grew from there." Did I have anything to do with that 2 decades between no, but it started something. Did I plan to? No, I was just being nice, and honored his desire to learn stuff. So you can't predict them, but you've got to be willing to invest 3, 4, 5 minutes with somebody. And that 1440 tracker that you probably saw listed on Podmatch's thing, that is a little device that I put together to help people kind of get that thing started. 1440 is the number of minutes that we are all given every day. They come in, it comes on bundles of 60, and every hour we undo another bundle and we spend or we invest those one at a time. If we've spent 1% or maybe 2% of those minutes each day helping somebody, we would be looking at about a quarter of an hour. So it's not heavy, it's not overwhelming, but if we do it a little bit at a time, it compounds over time and it can be pretty surprising sometimes. Always very rewarding.
Very rewarding indeed, that compound interest, Mr. Phil. And thank you for sharing that empowering answer
Oh,
and
you bet.
empowering story as well. And we
That's
need a
just
big,
one
big
of them.
applause. We need a big, big applause for that. Thank you. For a parent listening, this question lands with the weight. Are my children better because of me? But what about people without children, the teacher, the mentor, the friend, the colleague? How does the principle apply beyond biological legacy?
It affects everybody that we are willing to temporarily invest a little bit in. I'm just going to pull an example out of thin air here. Suppose I go shopping at a nearby store and I have seen the cashier 3, 4, half a dozen times in my shopping history there. And one day I notice that this cashier is a little gloom. I have a choice in that moment. I can pay for my merchandise and go on and not cause any more problems knowing that they're having a bad day. Or if there's not a long line behind me, I can say, you're a little down today. Is there anything I can do to help? probably they're going to say, no, I'm fine. And then you have a choice. If you can say, well, I just want you to know I notice and I'm thinking about you. If you're a person of faith and you think maybe they are, you could perhaps offer to pray for them, either right there or, but that little extra moment of noticing and caring will have an impact on somebody that you barely know. It might be a person at the gas station. I'm sure you've seen the reels that show up on social media periodically. My favorite is of a young woman who's counting out change on the hood of her vehicle to see how much gas she can put in the tank of her car. And while she's counting change, the gentleman at the gas pump across the island from her takes the nozzle out of his truck and puts it in her car and just fills it up. No words, no permission, just I'm going to do it. And when she turns around and discovers the gratitude on her face, the joy on her face, is how long did that take him? 2 minutes, maybe? But he brought joy into somebody else's life. So it doesn't have to be a family member. It can be a total stranger. Sometimes it's humor that you inject into a situation. If you're wired that way, go for it. It's great to make people smile.
It's priceless, people. It's priceless. The book asks readers to examine who shaped them and who they're shaping. What is the direction of gaze backward and forward? Which direction is harder for most people? And which one do they avoid more, Mr. Phil?
I think originally it's harder to look back and recognize. And it might not be that we don't want to. It might be that we just haven't taken the time to. I believe we are in a fast-paced, forward-looking, wanting to achieve kind of a society that doesn't look back very much. This is a week where we're watching Olympics on TV, a lot of us, and they're telling the stories of some of those athletes, where they have been, where they've come from, and that's an intentional kind of a thing. Most of us don't think back that much because we're so forward focused on the next promotion, the next degree, the bigger house, the cottage or the cabin up in the woods, that sort of thing. But if we'll stop and look back and recognize none of us got where we are by ourselves. Even if we're not as far along as we would like to be, we've gotten here with help. And so if we recognize that, then that gratitude begins to grow and we give it permission to grow and develop more. And there's a point where we say, I'm going to do that the same. I tell this story very early in the book. My wife and I hadn't been married very long. My grandfather passed away, and we drove to the Utah Rockies to celebrate his life, to be a part of his memorial service, etc. And after the funeral, after the lunch, a bunch of the family members were sitting around talking. Two of my cousins and I asked my grandmother if we could take Grandpa's car for a drive. And she gave us the keys, and we were driving around town talking, remembering. And my oldest cousin, as we were pulling away from a stop sign, he said, Grandpa was barely 5'4". Why do I feel so small? And we talked about it. It was probably because Grandpa and Grandma poured themselves into the lives of the friends that they knew, the people they worked with, the people they served. And I was the youngest of the three cousins, so I was in the back seat by myself. And I said to myself, I'm going to keep this going. I was probably 25 or 26 at that time. But that moment of I'm going to keep this going is a critical moment. I'll give our listeners a little secret. When you decide something like that, there are no fanfares. There's no music swelling up under the scene to tell everybody, hey, something important's happening here. It floats by in total silence. The person who makes the decision is the only one who knows. But later, we can look back and say, that's when that started. That's when that whole thing started, right there. but it's internal and it's silent.
Hmm. Certainly. So, Mr. Phil, to wrap up our discussion for today,
Yes,
finally, you've written a book about influence and fulfillment, but books are themselves acts of influence. You're trying to shape your readers. When you imagine someone finishing your book and closing the cover, what do you hope is better about them than when they are started? What do you hope you've transferred?
I trust that they have seen and examples or read some examples of how it has worked. The book has chapters, it has labs that they can work on if they'll do those, and the progress will go. There are also links to where they can come to work with other people together to effectively implement those things in their lives. I'm hoping it's a lifelong improvement that they walk away with.
A lifelong improvement. Thank you for that legacy, Mr. Phil. So, can you please invite our listeners to support Influence?
Absolutely. I'd love for you to take a look at it. There's the tracker to help you get started with this, and there are links to in the book to help things going. A lot of books are written as the end of a process for the author. I wrote this one to be the beginning of a process for just about everybody who reads it.
The beginning of the process. Yes, people, let's support Mr. Phil Ransom because if you support him for sure, more and more empowering books like this to come. So please do invite them for your upcoming book, Mr. Phil.
Yes, all you need to do is go to Amazon.com, search for Influenced by Phil Ransom. Ransom is how you spell the last name. You can see it on the screen there. And then once we get started, if you get a hold of the 1440 tracker also, then I follow up by email. And I teach you how to use that little instrument a few minutes each day, and then you can grow from there. So 1440.com would also be a good thing to do to start the process.
Interesting. So, Mr. Phil, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
More to come, people. See you soon.